Hey guys, so I want to talk to you about something that I have personally noticed that I don't see people talking about. It has to do with the housing crash that is currently happening, but it's hidden from you and I. I only know because I personally experienced it, so I thought that it would be good to share with everybody that I can. I recently moved clear across the country, sold my house, not in the best time. The rates had just started to rise. Had to sell it in winter, so it was in a little bit of a dip. But I had to go at that time if I was going to go, and we decided that we wanted to go. What had to happen in order for me to sell my house was that I had to buy down the rate for the buyer. That means that my house didn't really sell for what it looks like it sold for. So when somebody looks on Zillow and they see, oh, a house sold, it sold for asking price, or it sold for $20,000 less than asking price, or whatever, you don't really know what the price the seller had to take was in order to sell their house. In my personal instance, it was $25,000, I think, for the buy down rate. So that is a hidden real estate crash. Essentially, that is not what the real estate is selling for. That is what the price looks like it is, but the banks are taking a huge portion of that money and they're disguising it as being in the house price. That helps them in multiple ways. Number one, they get money right away. They get a buyer into a house that wouldn't otherwise qualify. Later, they're on the hook for paying that higher interest rate because it's not a rate buy down that's permanent. It's a stepped up increase over years, or it could be a 2 or 3 year buy down. Assuming rates don't go back to the historically low levels that we experienced over the last couple decades, those prices are going to go way up. For instance, I bought a house in 2006. I had to pay 7% interest. So now we're back to a 7% interest rate. That's only 14 years that it went to basically 0%, where people were able to get 2% mortgages if they wanted a 15-year mortgage. And now they're back up to 7% for mortgages. So what you're seeing is a lot of sellers are having to pay down rates for their buyers. And that could be $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, depending on the price of the house, depending on what they want the rate bought down to, depending on how long they want that new rate to be in effect. And so then a buyer comes along looking in that same neighborhood and looks on Zestimates and looks at comps and goes, oh, these houses are going for $500,000. When in reality, all of the sellers are only getting $475,000 for their house. And the buyers are essentially paying the full $500,000, but they're not qualifying for a $500,000 loan because $25,000 of that is going directly to the bank in order to buy down their rate so that they can qualify, which means that they really only qualify for potentially $350,000 worth of loans at the current rate environment. And assuming that they don't get a raise in their income commensurate with inflation over the next couple of years, when that rate resets, they're not going to be able to pay that payment. Because if they can't qualify for the payment now and prices keep going up and their raises haven't outpaced inflation, how are they going to afford the higher rate when their payment nearly doubles in 2 years? You see, the first several years that you're paying on a mortgage, the rate is the bulk of the payment, right? So if you have a $500,000 house and you have a 7% interest rate, essentially, give or take some small amounts, you're paying $35,000 that first year in interest. And then, of course, because you've paid down a little bit of principal every year, it goes to the point where in that 30th year of a 30-year mortgage, you're paying mostly principal because there's hardly principal left and you're still paying the same amount of payment on your amortization schedule. Okay? So essentially what is happening is that if they cut their rate in half with a rate buy down, now they're only paying $17,500 in interest for those first 2 years, 3 years, whatever the rate buy down period is, whatever that rate is locked in at for the first few years. And then in a few years when it resets, they're going to be paying that extra $17,000 in interest. Now you figure that out, that's that's $1,500 a month that their payment could go up. It's just off the top of my head, so I'm not doing the math. You could correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but that's an extra $1,500 a month. Where are they going to come up with that money? So if they couldn't afford it today, how are they going to afford it in 2 or 3 years? Now, if they're banking on the idea, it's not a fact, it's an idea that interest rates are going to go down in 3 years and they're going to be able to refinance, that's fine too, assuming that they still qualify for that amount at the lower rates. But if the property prices have come down, they're not going to be able to refinance. If rates haven't come down, they're not going to be able to refinance. If they've taken a hit and pay at work, they're not going to be able to refinance. So it's a huge gamble. This is essentially the same as the people that had those balloon payments back in 2006, 2007. They were getting loans where they only had a rate for 4 or 5 years. And then at the end of 4 or 5 years, they had this balloon payment. They had to refinance or pay off the house, but they didn't have the money to do so. We all saw how this worked out last time.